22:15 through 18. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me. When we're faced with trials, the example of Abraham must motivate us to remain faithful and to be obedient. Abraham died at the age of 175. He remained faithful to God without ever seeing the fulfillment of all the promises. Abraham and Isaac would never see their numerous descendants, the inheritance of the promised land, nor the blessings for all the nations. But their faith in what was to come was never shaken. Today we are able to see in the Old and New Testaments that God has indeed fulfilled those promises. Isaac would have two sons, Esau and Jacob. It was Jacob who received the blessing of his father. This blessing conveyed the promises that God had made to Abraham, such as that the descendants would be more numerous than the stars in heaven. With Isaac's blessing, the descendants of Jacob would also inherit the promised land. They would travel to Egypt during the time of Jacob's son, Joseph, and eventually become the slaves of the Egyptians, just as God had said. But God had also promised that the descendants of Abraham would be delivered from this slavery. When the moment arrived for the people to be delivered from the hands of the Egyptian Pharaoh, it was Moses who was chosen to lead them out. In delivering his people, God showed such power that all the earth would hear of the God of Israel. Moses led the people to Mount Sinai because God wanted to enter a covenant with them before they were to receive the promised land. This covenant would keep Israel from idolatry and wickedness. It would teach the people about sin and the holiness of God. After the deliverance from Egypt, God entered a covenant with the people of Israel. The goal for this covenant was to assure the final promise of God, that all the people of the earth would be blessed by its posterity. It was on the mountain of Sinai that the covenant with the people of Israel was established. Deuteronomy 5:1 through 5. Then Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the ordinances which I am speaking today in your hearing, that you may learn them and observe them carefully. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, with all those of us alive here today. The Lord spoke to you face to face at the mountain from the midst of the fire, while I was standing between the Lord and you at that time, to declare to you the word of the Lord, for you were afraid because of the fire, and did not go up to the mountain. The golden calf. As God was entering this covenant, the people of Israel showed their rebelliousness and lack of faith. When Moses went up upon Mount Sinai to receive the commandments, the people demanded that Aaron, the brother of Moses, have an idol made to worship. Because of their sins, this generation would not be allowed to see Canaan, the promised land. Instead, God made them wander in the desert for 40 years. Moses and the tablets of the law. It would be the following generation that would receive the promised land. With this covenant with Israel, God set down many laws, most notably the 10 Commandments. The Mount Sinai covenant between God and the people of Israel involved very precise requirements concerning offerings and sacrifices. The tabernacle was the meeting place for God and his people. The design of the tabernacle taught the people a lesson about the divine nature, especially God's holiness and mercy. His holiness was shown by the fact that only the high priest could enter into the presence of God with the blood that atoned for the sins of the people. His mercy was shown in that he was patient with the people of Israel, even though they were not always faithful to the covenant. The high priest. In the tabernacle there were 2 rooms. One was called the Holy Place, the other called the Holy of Holies. It was in the Holy of Holies that God showed his presence. The high priest was a very important person in Israel because he was the mediator between the people and God. Joshua. It was Joshua who led the people of Israel into the Promised Land after the death of Moses. The people of Israel conquered Canaan. After taking several cities, they took possession of the whole country, just as God had promised Abraham that they would. Joshua 21:43-45 says, So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their forefathers, and they took possession of it and settled there. The Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their forefathers. Not one of their enemies withstood them. The Lord handed all their enemies over to them. Not one of all the Lord's good promises to the house of Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. Once the children of Israel had settled in Canaan, they forgot their covenant with God, the promises of Abraham, and the deliverance from Egypt. In the times of Samuel, they demanded that they have a king as the other nations had. In reality, they no longer wanted for God to rule over them directly.